In the last video, we put new tires on the bandsaw wheels, and now I'm pulling apart the blade guides. So this kind of saw uses two different kinds of blade guides. These are the thrust bearings that go behind the blade, upper and lower. They're the same thing. This is the lower guide post. It just holds everything up. And what you're seeing here is there are two types. These are roller bearings, side roller bearings, and when you install a blade a 1/2 inch or wider, this is what you're going to use. And when you're using a 3/8 or smaller, you're going to use these guides. And this is basically like cool blocks, just designed for this type of saw. This is what they came up with. So I pulled everything apart, and all these pieces up here have been WD-40'd, lubricated, and cleaned. Pulled them everything apart. The areas where they attach have all been cleaned and shined up. So these parts, this is the upper, this is the lower. They're pretty much, from what I can tell, exactly the same thing. Just I'd like to keep them in order in the way they came off. So the next thing I'm going to do on these is pull out the blocks themselves and clean up the faces of them. We're just going to take a Allen wrench, pull these out, and I'll take you to the next step, and we're going to just sand on the sander, sand these faces flat and flush. I'm going to use the rigid oscillating belt sander to clean up the faces of these cool rods, cool blocks, whatever you want to call them. I think these are basically just phenolic resin. Again, these are pretty darn old and were the first thing when they came out with these for the Minimax bandsaw. I just got them because I was using narrow bands, but they may have some other options since then. I may be able to find some different rod or something like that, but these will work for what they are at the time. And they've gotten pretty messed up here on the face, so just gonna sand a little bit off here. Just FYI, I'm not even, this is gonna go so quickly, I'm not even hooking up dust collection on right now. Looking good. All right. Now we can start putting the saw back together. So the upper guide block is reassembled now with the thrust bearing and the two cool block side guides. As you can see, they're pretty far apart right now. They're just setting in there so that once we put the blade on, then we can snug them up onto the side of the blade and then move the whole assembly back and forth until we get those in the right position, and then we'll push the thrust bearing up to the back of the blade with just a tiny little bit of gap. And so the next step, I'm going to put a blade on. I got a delivery of some new blades from Lennox. The length on this saw is 149 inches, which comes out to 12 feet 5 inches. They're 1/2 inch width. And they're 6 tooth per inch. So we're going to try those. These are the first times I'm trying these blades. Going to open them up and get one of them on the saw and see if it works for what I need. Blades on the saw now, and all the blocks and everything are backed off. The blade was put on the saw and given just enough tension to take all the flex out of it. It's fairly strong, fairly tight in there now, but not cutting tension at the moment. And then the wheel was rotated backwards, and the tilt of the upper wheel was adjusted at the back of the saw until the blade rode pretty much roughly in the center of the tire, maybe a little forward. On this one, these are flat tires rather than crowned. So it's riding where I want it to be right now. And there's no guide blocks or anything in its way to push it one way or the other. So it's just the raw blade right now. So at this point, then what we're going to do is bring this piece forward, bring the whole guide block section forward. The thrust bearing is loose and pushed all the way back at the moment. And I want to get it in position so that the guide blocks will touch the band, but not the teeth. Because by getting them into the teeth, that's where the blocks can get really chewed up. And that's kind of what happened at one point before. So there we go. Got that in position. And then these can actually go right up and touch the blade. That's perfectly fine. Tighten them in place. You just don't want to deflect the blade. You want to let the blade ride the way it wants to ride, but it's not. That's going to hold it pretty well. And then you can take a piece of paper and put it behind the blade. Push your thrust bearing up against it, not too hard, and then just tighten it down. So there's a little bit of room for that blade to go push backwards before it hits the thrust bearing and starts to rotate. And then do the same thing on the bottom. Simple as that. We got our guides all assembled, and the last couple of pieces are ready to go in place. So got this, the throat plate on this isn't actually much of a plate, it's more like a basket. So because the casting right here is really thick, so that's going to just sit in there, and you want to adjust it so that nothing catches on the front lip. Up and down. If you need to put if you need to sand it down a little bit, or put some extra, maybe some sawdust under there to lift it up a little bit, that'll help. And then on this saw there's a clear plastic guide that just slides over here and then screws in place. We're ready to cut.